As a Ukrainian, I get asked a lot about what's going on in my country right now, how my family is doing, and what it's like to experience war. This July, I've been to heavily impacted areas such as Bucha and Irpin myself. This, by the way, is a picture of Irpin. And I have close family members who went through hell as they found themselves in the middle of fighting. I've also been to the front line in the Donbass just a few years ago, since the war has actually started in 2014. Now, I've been trying as best as I can to convey this experience. However, nothing, absolutely nothing I could ever tell you will ever compare to experiencing it yourself. So now that the interest for the topic is drying down, there are multiple initiatives, such as Ukraine War in VR, that try to bring this experience as close as possible, to make sure to show what it's actually like to be there without facing the actual physical risks, as I did. So it can look something like this. You can see that I'm moving this picture with the cursor. I don't know if you can see the cursor. Here's my hand. And despite the fact that we do not have, all of us here, VR cameras, you can still see this 360 effect that's very much like what we see in real life. This tool is absolutely wonderful. As you can see, it can do wonders for advocacy, because it really makes you feel like you're right there in the middle of the scene with a whole body sensation as if you were actually there. And despite the fact that you cannot feel, obviously, the pain from the injuries, however, you can imagine what it's like to be there in that car that you just saw that has been just shot at. VR is so powerful precisely because it acts on an emotional level. It makes us put ourselves in the place of somebody else and feel what they must have felt like. In other words, it makes us care. However, what if this wonderful tool that can be used for so much good was actually misused for something entirely different, such as misleading people and manipulating them through disinformation? Emotions. Those things that I've just mentioned that make us care, these are the same things that makes us very vulnerable to disinformation. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. I'm sure that the number of university degrees combined in this room is much higher than the average of any country. However, we're still all human, and if something feels real, it probably must be. VR is so special because it creates the sensory overload. It overrides logical thinking. And this is how it can push us to believe something that is actually not true. Disinformation works by playing with our emotions, our hopes and fears, even more so actually our fears. A well-designed disinformation campaign will push us into a rabbit hole of beliefs by pushing our buttons specifically on our existing interests and our existing passions. Or sometimes it can create new beliefs and a kind of Pavlovian effect. Now, this emotional reaction that we have to VR and to fake news more generally actually shows very, very well in the way we humans spread fake news already. A 2018 MIT study has shown that fake news travels 6 times faster on Twitter than truthful news. And once this emotion is already in us, it's extremely difficult to convince us otherwise. And imagine what power would VR hold if it was present in every household. Now, I would like to give you an example about the different biases that we face. Since we all know about the confirmation bias that we have with social media, we can imagine that VR would be even stronger a confirmation bias. However, we have a lot more biases that VR can exploit for emotional manipulations. Mimicry has long been known as an extremely powerful tool for influence. And so I'm going to give you here an example that please bear with me. We know, well, a series of experiments by Stanford researchers has shown that if we take a political candidate, an unknown one, and if we mix the facial features of a voter into his picture, this voter would rate this political candidate more favorably. So much so that this same experiment has shown that even if up to 40% of our features were blended into this candidate's face, we would not even notice it. It would go absolutely unnoticed. In other words, I don't know if you do or do not like Donald Trump, but if he looked a little bit more like you, maybe you would like him a little better. Thank you for the laugh, because it really makes me feel not too bad about my attempt at a joke. Thank you. Now, we can imagine a political candidate in the metaverse giving a speech to millions of people, and all these people will think that they see the same version of the candidate. However, in virtual reality, they will actually be seeing each a different version of his face, made to resemble them. Now, we could imagine this kind of mimicry on a massive scale. And of course, this would have consequences that will bleed into real life. This is an example of targeting, but targeting can be even more powerful with VR. An amalgamation of sensors and machine learning will create a feedback loop that will make VR even more powerful than that. We already know of VR sets that track the movements of our eyes. However, there are also VR sets that already exist that track the way our pupils dilate, allowing to process emotional reactions in real time. And it's not just about eyes. There is the muscle tension, our heart rate. There is also even the chemical composition of our breath. All these things can be tracked to follow our emotional reactions, the way we react to the content, even our level of stress. And so imagine, again, what would this mean if VR content were tailored, in real time to match those reactions? We already know that very specific targeted content, targeted at individuals, is already extremely effective on social media. Well, so much so that it has been instrumental in swaying referendums and elections. We know that already. This happened. And so what power would VR hold when it's in every household and when the metaverse is actually an established reality for everyone? And we could even imagine as well what would yield an hyper-targeted individual manipulation combined with mass manipulation. Now, okay, what kind of manipulation could we expect? Because this might be a bit abstract at this point. Well, the same kind of issues we already face in real life. Sometimes amplified, sometimes even created by social media. Motivated extremist groups could go a step farther, even terrorist groups. We already know from Facebook papers that this platform has served pretty much as a turnkey solution for extremist recruiters. Now, the metaverse could make this even easier for them. It could be even easier to push people into conspiracy theories. And there is a legitimate fear out there that VR will be used badly for journalism and well for propaganda. As we know, there is no shortage of motivated political regimes or candidates who would seek to further their influence on the democratic process than they already do. And ultimately, this would make this process void of its meaning. We also already know that abuse and offensive behavior has already made its way into different VR products. Only recently, a user of Horizon venues has complained about being sexually assaulted, virtually sexually assaulted, as she was using the platform. And this is how she describes her experience. Within 60 seconds of entering the lobby, I was verbally and sexually harassed by 3 to 4 male avatars with male voices that virtually groped my avatar and took selfie photos within the virtual environment. Now, I'm actually saving you the more unsavory bits of the quote, given our context. However, so far, nothing or nearly nothing has been done to prevent this from happening again. Now, let's park VR for a second and be honest about the situation we are in right now. What we know is that social media has already dramatically altered the way we perceive information and the way we trust information, which in turn has also changed the very fabric of our society. In 2017, so just a few years ago, BBC Future Now has asked 50 experts to give the biggest challenges of the 21st century, and many have named the breakdown of trusted information sources. Facebook posts linking to deceptive sites have received 1.2 billion interactions in only Q4 of 2020. And spoiler alert, things are not getting any better. What we know is that companies, so far, tech companies, have had a dismal record of trying to limit and control misinformation on their own platforms. We also know that if these same companies have had trouble limiting the spread of disinformation on more simple platforms, such as Facebook or Instagram, how can we trust that they're going to do better in a much more complex metaverse? The way the metaverse can be safe will partly depend on the way those companies train AI systems to moderate the platforms. However, we cannot solely rely on that, given the previous experience. What we also have seen is that the speed at which technology has evolved has oftentimes left regulators and policymakers playing catch-up. They've produced regulations that came after the fact, so way too late, or were simply insufficient. So we can wonder here, now, for this future with VR, what can innovators and regulators do? Well, we should start now. And I'm going to pound a few more times here just to insist on the now, but we should start now, thinking about the policies that would help us to maintain the metaverse safe. Now, because it's before the underlying technology has even been developed. Now, I realize that our human nature is like that. We only deal with problems as they come. We're not really equipped to look very far into the future and trying to imagine new problems and try and deal with them. However, it's also our human nature, and really believe in our human nature here, to learn from our mistakes. And we have made quite a few with social media recently. Now, I also realize that I've painted a very bleak picture of our future in VR. However, it really does not have to be that way. I really do not want it to be that way, as virtual environments have shown so much promise for the good. They would transform everything, from the way we work to the way we consume information. It is just our collective responsibility to act now. I'm going to pound again a few times, to act now, to make sure the metaverse doesn't transform into some sort of lawless environment in New Wild West. Now, I would like to finish my speech here by asking you, all of you, individually, to think a little bit about what we could do, both as Atos, a company, how we could play a role in here, be part of that conversation, as well as individuals, how we can influence this process and make sure that all this potential that VR has is harnessed for the good. Thank you.